G'day you mob, how's it going? Pete here from Aussie English, and this is another episode of The Goss, where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smissen, and we chat about the week's news. Usually news and current affairs from Australia, though if something interesting comes up worldwide, we often chat about that as well, and today is sort of that kind of case. So today we chat about why Australians are so obsessed with American politics. And to be honest, I think that most other countries find themselves in a similar position where they too probably know more about American politics than they do their own country, which tends to be the case in Australia. So anyway, this conversation kind of goes off on a few different tangents, though we start with the fact that Dad and I caught up the other day, sat down, I think it was 10:30 in the morning, and watched the US debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So anyway, guys, without any further ado, smack the bird. Let's get into it.
So the news.
Well, did you want to talk about the Trump election currently and why Australians, I mean, probably like the rest of the world, are so fascinated with US politics? Because it seems like you grow up in Australian society and you don't realise until you really start getting into politics about how much the average Australian probably knows more about American politics than they do Australian politics. And that doesn't seem, and that to say that, it's like, yeah, that's not weird. Like, of course. But then to think about it, and you're kind of like, I can't imagine an American ever knowing anything more about any other country's political system than its own.
Yes.
And so it is objectively a very strange thing that we are. I mean, I have no idea what it's like for, say, Brazilians or people in China or, you know, completely different countries that aren't necessarily the English-speaking world, but it definitely seems a pattern in the English-speaking world that we've constantly got our, you know, ear to the glass to the door where America's on the other side. So do you want to flesh that out a bit and talk about it?
Yeah, well, I think to start with, it's and it's not that we have an obsession with Americana. And that we've talked a lot about America and we keep comparing Australia to America with regard to a bunch of things. But I think that's because, certainly for my lifetime, and I suspect a little bit before that, when Hollywood movies came out and then television came out, ignoring the minimum local content rules that, you know, our Australian television channels have to abide by,
which means that we need a certain
there's got to be a certain
hours
proportion of
each channel
number of
from
hours
Australian
on a channel has to be
content.
Australian produced content.
Otherwise, we end up becoming America.
But a large majority of the rest of our television and certainly our movie industry has come from America. So we're very familiar with American culture, American way of life, American politics, those sorts of things. So familiarity is one side. The second thing is that America is our biggest ally in a political and a military sense. It's also that I think we've spent a lot of time working through our own political system and in terms of not individually but as a country and comparing it to America and the evolution of Australian politics, particularly over not the last 10 years, but the sort of 10 to 20 years leading up to that, where there was a big Republican movement to try and move away from having the Queen as the head of state
in Australia,
Australia, and to break down our tie with Britain as the mother country.
This would have meant that we had a president instead of a prime minister,
or some form of well, we would still have had a prime minister, but the president would have been the head of state as opposed to the Queen. Yeah. And so there was a lot of discussion comparing the American presidential system with what we currently have and saying, how do we want to move towards it? So I think people who grew up during that period are probably very aware of the American political system as well. So it's a combination of just sort of history and sort of cultural overload that I think has meant that we're in that situation.
Well, and to pause you there, we get a lot of not just TV shows and movies, but they tend to be TV shows and movies that revolve around the American political system.
Yeah,
like what is one
American
of your
pop culture, or
what's one of your favorite American?
West Wing.
The West Wing, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and so
West Wing is literally in the West Wing of the White House.
Well, and even I remember
television.
I remember watching Stargate. Yeah. You know, and a lot of
despite the fact that it's Canadian, it was made for an American audience.
Yeah, but a lot of Stargate, for those of you who are fans who probably already know, is political. whether it's with Russia and China and other countries and France, and often they have to deal with the president. You know, the general has a red phone in his office because he's, you know, got the president effectively on the line.
Yeah.
And so through that as well, you end up learning a lot about their political system and how it works.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that certainly up until the last decade, America has been the single dominant economy in the world. By far and away the biggest economy. China is rapidly catching up, but they're still only, you know, they're still just over half, I think.
No, they're closer now, I think. It'll be 5 years until they beat them.
And so they're not our biggest trading partner. I don't think they ever have been, but they've been a big one.
The US?
The US. But the US, with its trade with all sorts of other countries, has meant that Australia's import-export trade has been influenced by America. And if America's doing free trade deals with Canada and Mexico, that will change the way we do deals with Canada and Mexico. If America has a relationship with the European economy, then we will have a relationship with Europe the same way. We can't really go off in a different thing because we want to sort of almost hitch our wagon to the same wagon train rather than saying we're better off running alone.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we will just follow whatever America does, but it's sort of in a general economic point of view, that's what we end up doing, which means that we are very concerned about what goes on in, you know, say, the American presidency or, you know, large foreign policy things. We have gone to war with America almost every time they've gone to war.
As in not against America, but with them on the same side.
So since the Second World War, basically every war that America has been in, Australia has joined up voluntarily to join them in.
I remember that when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, and you're just like, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
Why are we sending?
There?
Like, this is America's, you know, issue. Why do we need to be there? And then, you know, there'd be French soldiers, Canadian, New Zealand, British, and you're just like, what have they got to do with this?
I know. Yeah. So I think that's where we are. And, you know, just as you introduced this segment, I was thinking that, our news for the last 6 months has been totally dominated by COVID. For the last 3 months, COVID and the American presidential election are coming.
And BLM, Black Lives Matter as well, which is
and
political.
The Black Lives Matter is tied in with the American political system as well. And that all just cascaded together this week, when, you know, Donald Trump had ended up being, you know, tested positive for COVID. So not only, it's sort of almost like you sit there and go, oh, shit. You mean he can't even just leave our bloody COVID headlines to us?
Well, it's so interesting too, because it becomes that, I don't know if we have a word for it, but where you can't look away. It's kind of like a train wreck. And you're just like sitting there staring it down whilst it's, you know, people are dying and there's also the chaos in front of you, but you can't look away.
I know.
And it seems to be that sort of thing. I don't know if there's Schadenfreude is a good German word where you derive pleasure from someone else's pain. I don't know if it's so much pleasure, but it's definitely curiosity in terms of what is going to happen next in America. Like, this is just, you couldn't write this shit as the West Wing. Like, the West Wing was tame.
Yeah, if they brought out West Wing Series 8 and with a 12-year delay or whatever on it, and they wrote, and somebody
starring himself
sent this to the studio and said, "Here's my script, my rough outline script for the season." They just thrown it away and said, "Don't be ridiculous. Nobody would ever believe that."
But it is interesting, I think, for me at least, growing up to the point that I'm at currently. You're obviously, you know, a bit less than twice my age, but it feels like as you grow up, the younger you are, the more you think this is how the world is. This is how the world always will be. And the older you get, it feels like, oh shit, everything changes. Yeah. And so it does seem like America's potentially had its heyday, and its society, or, you know, the country and its control globally is on the downturn.
The fall of the American empire.
But what do you think that's going to mean for the rest of the world if, say, America does end up a lot more focused on itself, whether with Trump or with Biden, or whether in the next 10 or 20 years? Is that going to change things globally a great deal, do you think?
Oh, look, it'll have to change it globally. Whether it changes it for better or for worse will remain to be seen.
Yeah.
But, you know, as you said, the rise of China, economically, politically, they tend to isolate themselves deliberately and provocatively. India is the sort of hidden giant as well, not necessarily from a trade or at least in a goods trade, but a services trade. India drive a huge amount of the world's IT.
Yeah.
And
as I know, thank you, Amit and Praveen, who work for me from India.
And so I think those economies are going to suddenly become much more significant because, let's face it, Australia, America, most of Europe, UK, 19th century economies that have just changed with technology, but they haven't changed significantly in the way they do things. They've been primary production, manufacturing type economies. The IT economy relies very little other than producing devices, which, funnily enough, most of those get produced in Asia now, even though they're by American companies. Or
it's cheaper for them, right?
Or Japanese
Imagine
companies.
what an Apple would cost.
Japanese companies are not
Sony
is not producing things in Japan. I doubt whether Samsung is producing them in Korea. They're producing them in cheaper economies. The same thing with Apple and Microsoft and all those things, and Google and so on. But that economy itself is an intellectual economy.
Yeah.
And so that relies on having education of your people. And it's no surprise that India, China, and some of the smaller Asian countries numerically, a little bit like even Singapore. Singapore is it's an island city nation. They realise their only primary product is their people.
Yeah.
And so they're all about education, because that's the only thing you can do to improve the quality of your human output, is to educate them better. And unfortunately, just to finish off there, I think that the big Western economies are still stuck in this agricultural and manufacturing mindset that is using people as skilled labour, in some cases, and in other cases, sort of economic large corporate leaders, but they don't realise that the world is changing. Yes, we're still going to have to keep producing, goods and services and things for people to eat and to, build technologies and so on. But a lot of that's going to come out of people's heads now. Not that food will, but there are better ways of producing. We're not going to get better agriculture without the use of new technology. Yeah. And then new technology is going to come through innovation and people's thinking. It's not going to come through just making more tractors. Well,
it's almost somewhat of a waste, right? If you're using your highly educated, highly wealthy population to do, labour jobs, when the average Australian farmer could be taught to, or, educated in the system that we have here to end up being whatever it is, a few steps above that in terms of intellectual output, or whatever it is, right? Especially if other countries that are moving up through the rungs are able to fill that position at a lower cost. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So China, seems to me, has spent the last 50 to 70 years pulling the majority of its population out of poverty and up into the upper middle class now, whereas India seems to be lagging behind quite a bit from what I understand. And then there's an interesting issue in India, I think, with it being, and with all due respect to my Indian friends, one of the most racist places in the world, with the caste system, that seems like you need to break that down. But how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Without it leading to other... I mean, we see what happens in America and even in Australia with the racial issues and
it's not just racial issues, it's just basic social structure.
Yeah.
And one of the other news stories, and maybe we could move on to it, but one of the other news stories that I was going to talk about is that tonight is the federal budget, which has been delayed since May because of COVID, and the fact that the government, and rightly so, spent billions of dollars trying to prop up the job situation with people losing their jobs throughout COVID. So they're releasing the federal budget tonight. And that a new style of budget. It's ironic that usually leading up to a budget in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in many other places in the world, that the opposition and the press are usually screaming at the government, you need to do more of this, you need to do more of this, you need to do more of this, you guys don't know what you're doing. But there's this government, I'm not a supporter of this government in particular, but certainly from a political spectrum, but this government seemed to have got their pre-marketing right in terms of saying this is about people now. It's not about, we've got to prop up the economy so people get their jobs back, and so on. Now, there's a few subtle things that I think they're still missing the point on, which I'm happy to talk about. But it's a very different environment to be creating a budget that is really in a 5 to 10 year recovery mode that in my lifetime I've never seen. I'm sure it was similar after the Second World War and after the Great Depression and after the First World War, where governments were about saying we have to stimulate the economy to create more jobs, to get people back to work, to allow small business to recreate itself, because so many small businesses have not just gone under, but have put themselves on hold for the last 6 to 8 months, that it's going to be very difficult to get them back unless there is some form of financial incentive or infrastructure set up to enable them to do it.
Well, the only, what would you call it, the silver lining there is that there'll be a lot more openings, right, for other businesses to get started. It's like you've cleared the rainforest and left the land fallow.
So farmers get
and it'll
out
just,
there.
there's going to be a whole lot of other things that pop up that you don't know about.
A lot of that
isn't,
infrastructure is still there. There are the people who've closed down cafes and restaurants and things. They haven't ploughed the buildings into the ground.
No.
Those things are still there. So, and presumably those people will go back, most of them, and recreate
That was
themselves.
the scary thing. I had a friend who was jogging through Melbourne CBD, I think probably in the first few months of COVID, and he was just like, Felice, all of these buildings, Felice.
I think I read
like,
somewhere, and it was on a blog, so, you can take the numbers with a grain of salt. And that's not to say they're wrong. It's just that I have no way of checking them. But somebody was saying in the Melbourne Central Business District that about 50% of shop fronts were closed.
Yeah.
Not just the shops closed, but people had just moved out of their business.
Yeah.
It doesn't say they won't move back in, but they're just no longer, they've defaulted on their leases and they've just said, look, I'm not going to be here anymore. So
I'm just accruing debt.
Picked up and gone. And so, it really will be a very big step to get us back on track.
Well,
it's not going to happen in months. It'll be years.
As someone who knows next to nothing about economics, what is a way in which a government like the Australian government can stimulate the economy? When they say that, it seems to be a buzzword that goes around on the
we have to
news.
stimulate the economy.
But what does that mean practically?
Yeah, look, the way this government is claiming they're going to do it, and you've got to assume that all of their rhetoric that they've been leading up with their pre-budget marketing is going to be represented in what they release tonight. And maybe it'll be interesting for us to unpack the rhetoric with the reality in our next time when we've had a bit of time to think about what they did do. But all their rhetoric is around tax cuts to low and middle income earners. Which is fine. If you've got people who are struggling financially, then giving them a tax cut means that they've got more money in their pocket. However, I don't think there's a magnanimous element to that. They're still using this old style economics of a combination of trickle down and trickle up economics, and nobody has ever shown those to work to my satisfaction. Certainly trickle down economics, and that is that you make tax cuts to wealthy people,
give
and they will invest
$1,000
more, and they'll invest more. Means that they don't go out and employ more people; they just make a bigger profit.
Yeah.
And the trickle up of we'll give them another, as a good example, somebody who's on an average income in Australia of somewhere between 50 and 100,000, and I think that's about the sort of 2 standard deviations out of the mean. The mean is somewhere in the $70,000-$80,000 range.
The last time I checked, it was about $82,000.
But if you're earning between 50, 60 and 100,000, you're going to earn about $1,000, something like $1,000 to $2,000 more in the next year. And that's increased even further because they're backdating it back to the start of the financial year. So you won't get the money in your pocket immediately, but you'll actually get a tax break when at the end of this financial year in your tax. That's a great thing. Money in your pocket is a good thing, but there's little evidence that people will go out and spend that in order to get the economy back on track. I think the other way, which was done by a previous government after the global financial crisis, is to spend on big government infrastructure spending. Because these are things that need to be done. At the time, they spend a lot of time and money on road and rail infrastructure and on government building infrastructure, things like building hospitals, building schools, doing maintenance work, backdated maintenance work on schools that had been sitting there for a decade, which improves the quality of the infrastructure, but it also employs people. You're actually creating jobs directly. So if I'm going to, and the big one that a lot of people, certainly the Green Party and a lot of the sort of social workers and things around the country at the moment are saying is we need more public housing for low-income earners that are never going to be able to afford. They struggle to afford to pay rent. They're never going to be able to afford their own house. But we need more public housing that's the government then provides as rentable accommodation. If we were to put money into building that now, then that will have a 50-year effect down the track because you're building things that people will still be living in 50 years' time. It's not just, here, Pete, have $2,000 more in your pocket and we're relying on you to do the right thing and going out and spending it.
Here's $2,000. Be sure to spend it.
Yeah.
Buy frivolous stuff.
Exactly. Which, if that's what they want to do...
Just give us vouchers.
Yeah, exactly. Either give you the vouchers or say, hey, we're going to spend it on your behalf.
What do you want?
The average person spends take away rent and mortgage if they're whatever their housing situation is,
and whiskey.
The average person is spending money on food, on entertainment, and on travel. The food industry in Australia at the moment has actually been booming. The supermarkets industry have been booming,
especially the toilet paper aisle.
Let's not go there because that's all people have got to spend their money on.
Yeah, and they're all at home.
They're all at home. Yeah. Whereas, so why not say, well, we'll actually prop up this stuff. We'll get travel companies and we'll give them 10% discount on travel so that people can afford to travel.
Well, they did that in Tassie, right? Tasmania, the government gave out travel vouchers, I think, to the tune of $1,000, $2,000 or something.
We'll make it free for people. Once Tasmania, as an example, and I'm not proposing this specific one, but as an example, you could say, we'll make it free for people to travel by ferry from Melbourne to Tasmania.
Get down there, spend some money.
And that means that I'm much more likely to go, instead of it costing me a few $100s to get there, I've now got a few $100 in my pocket when I go there, and I'll spend it on accommodation and souvenirs and food and those sort of things.
Living in Tassie during a pandemic crushed it, right? I haven't heard any issues of them having more cases.
They had trouble early on. But once they'd got rid of those,
they're like a very, very tiny Australia.
Well, the beauty is that it's a very easy border to close.
That's it.
You know, people driving there.
Yeah. So. To finish up, I guess, we were talking about America at the start. We found ourselves the other day on the couch together at about 10:30 a.m. watching the debate. So, what are your predictions of how this election's going to go? I think you were saying you're putting your money on Biden currently.
I'm not sure whether my heart is driving my head or the other way around, but this is going to make.
Do you want to be an optimist or a pessimist?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm hoping I'm a realist, and I just look at it and say, part of me says, and I've mentioned this before, that I love America. I've travelled more in America than any country in the world other than Australia.
Probably more than here. At least big
about
trips.
The same, yeah. I've been there more than 40 times through, going there, 4 or 5 times a year for 10 years for work. I cannot believe that 330 million people can be this stupid again, regardless of which side of politics they sit on. And there will be some people who are diehard Republicans and some people who are diehard Democrats where it doesn't matter who they prop up, they will vote for them. I have to think in my heart that there are going to be a number of Republicans who, because of their family history, their belief systems in politics and economics and everything else, simply cannot vote Democrat, but cannot vote for Trump. So I'm hoping they will simply not vote.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that a large proportion in the middle will get out and vote, which they normally don't.
And that's the difference, I guess, too, quickly putting a sort of, bookend there. It's that Australia has mandatory voting and America doesn't.
Yeah, one of the, I think, 16 countries that have versions of mandatory voting.
Yeah, so America, you'll have, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's something like, a third of eligible voters will actually turn out to vote?
Between a third and a half.
And a half, so less than half of the people that can vote. And so I guess there's all these people at home at the end of the day saying, well, I didn't vote for him.
Yeah.
Whoever wins.
Exactly. And that's one of the challenges that I think America has at the moment in comparison with the way the Australian political system works. And look, we've certainly made some mistakes. We've had some complete lunatics as leaders in our country over the last 20 years. But I think the difference is that our electoral system, forget the political side, our electoral system is set up knowing exactly how many people in the country have to vote and knowing exactly where they live and setting up an infrastructure that allows each of those people to vote. We live in a town of, I think the current population of Ocean Grove is about 15,000 people. Yeah, it swells to 40,000 in, holiday period, but there's probably 15,000 people there. Of that would probably mean you'd reckon about half of those. So maybe 7,000 or 8,000 people are eligible to vote. In a town this size, there'll be 4 or 5 polling stations on election day, which means if you turn up there any time between 8 in the morning and 6 at night when they're open, the longest wait you're going to have is maybe 20 minutes standing around outside to vote.
Yeah.
If you don't
even in a massive line, it goes quick.
It goes quick, yeah, because it's set up, it's efficient, and because everybody knows. On average, they know, and they know historically, the Electoral Office knows historically to say, this polling place in this location, we know that they will have, come through. They'll have 500 people turn up within the first hour. So we're going to front load the people there, and we don't need people at 5 o'clock at night to be hanging around. You only need 1 or 2. So
it's almost like it's a system set up by plumbers who want just optimal flow.
Exactly.
And so you almost go in and you're constantly moving
understood
through it. Whereas in the US, it's completely different, right? Where they play games and they don't want people to turn out. They do want people to turn out in certain areas. They make it harder. They close places.
Exactly. And those there is no federal election commission the same way that there is in Australia that oversees the entire thing. Yes, there is an electoral commission and it oversees the voting, but it doesn't oversee the process of voting. That process of voting is determined on a state by state, sometimes on a county by county basis. And so a particular county that has a mayor who is a Republican says, well, I think it looks more likely that Democrats are going to vote now, and this is all hypothetical because it'll work the other way as well. So I'm going to just close a few polling stations. I'm going to have less.
Yeah.
I'm not going to allow mail-in votes.
Yeah.
And those sort of things happen. And I'm not exactly sure of how the whole thing works, but it's much more open to that sort of manipulation than ours is. Doesn't mean you get a better decision in the end, but at least the fact that everybody has the opportunity to vote without having this circus of, I can turn up if I like and I have to be pre-registered. Yes, you have to be registered to vote in Australia, but it's the 18th birthday present. You get a letter in the mail that just says, hey, you've just noticed you've turned 18. You're required to. And that people can choose not to.
Well, you get a maximum of $20 fine.
But you can choose not to register.
Yeah.
But they'll chase you up and they'll fine you if you don't.
$20.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah. I don't know what it is now. It's only ever happened to me once and I was overseas at the time.
They tried to get me, but I moved to Canberra without telling them. And that's why I was like, sorry, I was in Canberra. That's why I didn't vote. It wasn't because I didn't want to. Here's my bill with an address.
Yeah. And they'd let you off.
Yeah, they were just like, whatever.
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting circus for the next 4 weeks to see what happens, because it's 4 weeks from today.
The interesting thing that I was watching some stuff, and again, it's the train wreck. I can't not look at it, right? Like, you can't look away, and I'm listening to all of these other people interpreting what's going on. The more interesting thing than Trump or Biden is the fact that you have the most powerful country in the world almost at civil war, and neither side is willing to listen to the other side. And you have a system set up where it is so bipartisan. You have the Democrats and the Republicans, and no matter what the result is going to be in this election, the other side isn't going to accept it. Like, there's close to 0%. There's going to be massive issues, of people saying that it was a corrupt vote. If Trump wins, if Trump loses, all his supporters are going to say, well, it was corrupt. And so it's like, what on earth is going to happen to this country?
I will say that the sort of 5 minutes in the hour and a half that Joe Biden actually had the time to say something before he got interrupted every 5 seconds.
When he called him a clown?
Yeah.
Sorry, person. Yeah. That wasn't rehearsed.
No, exactly. Where the question, and I can't remember the specific question now because there were only 6 asked. I should be able to remember them, but the question was around racial conflict and is America racist and what can we do about it? And Trump said nothing, just blustered through it. But Biden did say that it is time for us to just get people around the table to talk.
Yeah.
He said this is not about defunding the police. It's not about blaming police. It's not about blaming blacks. It's not about blaming whites or Hispanics or anything else. This is about just sitting around a table, getting community leaders together to tell us what they think the solution is. And that to me makes much more sense, because the solution to these problems has to come from the communities. You can't just impose a solution, because people get 50% of people just politically are going to reject it, no matter what you impose. Doesn't matter which side of politics you sit on.
Yeah.
Half the people are going to be there. But if they get an involvement in it, they can actually buy into the solution. And look, it's the same thing in Australia, that there are a number of those things that have happened. We had an economic forum in the early 1980s because the Australian economy was going down the toilet in comparison with what it had been in the late 70s and the early 80s. And there was a huge economic forum that basically just got business leaders and union leaders and politicians all in a room for 2 days just to throw out ideas. No, there's no bad ideas here. We're not coming up with solutions. We just want a starting point so that the government can then move forwards. And I remember Hawke and Keating, Bob Hawke was the Prime Minister and Paul Keating was the Treasurer. They were being criticised by supporters of the opposition by saying, well, it's their job to lead. It's not our job to tell them what to do. Yeah. And their answer was, well, for the last 20 years, various sides of politics have been leading and we're still down the toilet. So we want to get everybody together. So I think that's going to be more and more the way politics is going to go in what are clearly divisive issues. The only way you can break down that division is by getting those people together to talk about it, because you can't have a government, no matter which side of politics they sit on, impose a solution, because regardless of whether that solution is a good one or a bad one, purely on political grounds, 50% of people are going to disagree with it.
Yeah. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Me and Noah, he's here as well, smacking the microphone with his spoon. That was another episode of The Goss. Don't forget, guys, if you want to get access to all of the Goss episodes, the transcripts, the MP3s, the videos, the entire episodes from 1 to, I think we're up to like 40-something now. Yeah, that's it, mate. Just go to aussieenglish.com.au and you can sign up for those. Anyway, I'm Pete, your host. This has been another Aussie English episode. It's a pleasure. And I'll see you soon.